So today we are going to be talking about the public library statistics and all the changes that are going to happen for next year's survey. You're all able to unmute if you want to, so please ask me questions as I go because I think it'll be easier for you to ask. I'm going to talk about these section by section, and we have an hour, so if it's getting too long, I may stop, and then we can do questions at the end for anything we can't get to in the middle. But like I said, this is, for your information, so I really want to make sure we're answering all your questions because there are quite a few changes. So we get so in case anyone has not worked with me or heard from me before, I've got my contact information on this slide. I'm currently doing the public library stats for Idaho, and I also work with all our grants. So like I said before, if you have questions about the ARPA grant or other grants, you can also contact me about those. And then I wanted to just give you a quick reminder. So for the survey we're talking about, it's going to open in mid-October. We shoot for as close to October 1 as possible, but we know that we have several things we have to provide to Baker and Taylor where we have to pull the data after September 30th. So it just takes, a week or so to get everything up and running and do final tests before it's ready. So you can expect it around October 15th that it'll be open for the year. It'll be due January 1st of 2022. And then I've put the website here. So we finished our RFQ process. We're going to have the same vendor. It's still Baker and Taylor for the next few years. So everything will look the same. They'll go to the same website. And your login ID and password should still be good next year. And they'll look kind of like this setup here. If you don't have them and you need them, just contact me and I can get them to you. Okay, so as we talk about this, I always like to give a little reminder that we're collecting data in 3 different areas. So there are the federal questions where every single state in the U.S. territories all ask the same questions with the same exact definition. And that helps so that we can compare data nationwide. So we can't change the definition for our needs in Idaho. It has to be exactly the same. And then we have our state questions where we collect data on the public library survey that we can use statewide, and you can compare yourself to other state Idaho libraries, or we at the ICFL can use that data to help lead our program choices. And then on the local level, whatever we're not collecting, you are more than welcome to collect whatever you think you need for your library, your board, any consortia you're a part of. So just because it's not asked on the survey doesn't mean that you can't collect it. And we did, I think we asked back in February or March for changes you'd like to see, and I think you'll mostly be pleased with everything that we're adding. And I also want to give just a quick heads up. I'm kind of going to be talking about 3 different report periods here. We're talking about federal fiscal years. So those go from October 1st to September 30th. The fiscal year 20 report is the one we just completed. We're waiting for the final okay on the federal level. So hopefully I won't be coming back to any of you to ask any more questions about that one, and you can consider it done. Fiscal year 21 is the report period we're in now where you're collecting data, and that survey will go live in October. And then federal fiscal year 22 will start October 1st, 2021. So what I want you to be aware of as we talk about these changes, whenever new changes come through, we are not expecting that you have data the first year because we're already in the middle of May, which is almost all the way through the collection period for fiscal year 21. And so for some of these data points, you may not have been collecting information for the past year. So if you don't have the information for these items that I'm talking about, do not worry. Just plan on starting to collect the data for these items October 1st of 2021 so that you can report it when the federal fiscal year 22 survey comes around. Does anyone have questions on that? Or is that pretty clear, hopefully? So again, don't worry. The first year, they don't expect full data. And even the second year, they don't always expect good data. They're kind of hoping 3 years down the road that they start getting full, complete data following the definition. Okay, so I'm going to get into the sections now. And like I said, if you have questions, just stop me, put them in the chat. Just let me know. the first two sections I'm going to talk about, they're not really changes, but I just want to make you aware of a few things. So in section 2, which is your service area, we did just have the federal census come out with their new population data for 2020. So for the past 10 years, we've been using census estimates, but this year we have the full actual population data for what people reported. So Karen, who works on the stats as well, and I will be going through and pulling those numbers. So whether that's positive or negative for your area, whether you grew or not, those numbers are the numbers we're going to be using. I know in the past, Patrick had told me some places their city had a number they preferred to use that was their estimate, but because we have these new official census numbers and they're supposed to be current, that is what we're going to be using. If you have a contract area that doesn't follow an exact boundary, just get with me and Karen so that we can make sure that we're getting everything included. And then for section 5, which is revenue, there aren't going to be any new questions. I just want to give you a reminder that the CARES Act and the ARPA Act, any funds you get from those, whether through us or other locations, those are going to be reported in your federal income and expenditures. So anything that gets from those, and you're, remember, going from October 1st through September 30th. So last year you got your CARES money early, like in May, June. So unless you got CARES money from someone else, you most likely won't be reporting that on this next survey. But if you're going for the ARPA grant, then you will be reporting that on this coming survey. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about the actual changes. So section 7 is collections. So that's the items that you have in your library that you circulate out to patrons. So the new changes that they're adding a total physical item. So they want to get a total of all of your print materials, your audio, so like your actual CDs, video, and then they're adding a new item also for other circulating items. So some people have collections where, I think it's Cascade that has some like kayaks and different things. So it's part of your collection. You circulate it out, but it's not a book, it's not a video, it's just this other item. You'll be able to count those this year, and then the total items will be counted into the collection. And when we get to circulation, those will also be counted. And then we are also going to, since we started the idea collection, these items will be pre-filled by us at ICFL, so you won't have to worry about pulling these numbers. The idea ebooks that are part of the state collection will be pre-filled for you, and the idea audio, e-audio, will also be put in. Are there any questions on this section? Someone has their self unmuted. No? Okay. So in circulation, like I said, we picked up, we're adding other physical items to the collection. So we're also going to be adding the circulation of those items. So you can add that in. And then we're also going to be looking at, for the electronic circulation, we want to break down, we've had a lot of questions on, how do we count when we're part of all of these consortia? So with IDEA and your own consortia, how is that going to work? So we're going to break it down for you, where you're going to have the circulation of the book, so the ebooks, e-audio, and e-video that your library owns outright. So you purchased it, only you own it, your item. And then we're also going to have the circulation of your consortia that is borrowed by your patrons. So not the whole consortia. So if you have 8 libraries in your consortia, we only want you to report the ones that your library patrons use. And my understanding is that's data that should be available. And then we will also be pulling the circulation of the IDEA collection that you use. And my understanding is that we will be able to pre-fill that for you. So that will be another item that you don't have to worry about collecting for yourself.
Jamie?
Yes.
This is Jen in Glens Ferry. I wanted to ask, I put in the chat for that, the other section, the other stuff, the kayaks, cake pans, whatever, is that where kits would be included, like learning kits that you check out? Do we do those as well, or is that where those would fit in, or do we not do those?
So,
like it's a item kit.
yeah, I have to look up the kits because the kits are kind of different, and I think that they were in one of the definitions, but generally, like if you have a book and a CD in the kit, then you would count that as one item. Let me get back to you on that one because I want to look up the actual definition and then let you know exactly where it goes.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's another question. Hi, are the state questions labeled as state versus the federal questions? I don't remember seeing a difference, just curious. So in our survey in Baker and Taylor, no, it is not differentiated. That's actually something I'm looking at. All of the federal items, when you looked at that PDF I sent out, they actually label them. They're like number 650, 651, 652. And when I did this in Illinois, all of our federal questions, we kind of had that in brackets that this was federal 650 so that it was clear which ones were the federal that we could not change. But for right now, our survey in Baker-Taylor does not differentiate between federal and state so that you can easily see which is which. Right,
Jamie, this is Melanie from the Emerald Tuttle Library. Curious on your idea collection. Will that be for that you guys pre-fill in? Will that be for each of our individual libraries or for that whole consortium group?
For the number of books held or for?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way this works, Tammy, Dylan, and I have been having a lot of discussions on this. There is the idea collection that is owned by ICFL. So let's just call it 5,000 items. And then there's the portion of the collections where you buy in. So you may have something that you share an idea that you own as a library, call it 10,000 items. So what ICFL will be pre-filling for you is we as ICFL make available 5,000 items. When you report your consortia holdings, you'll need to report anything you own because some libraries are only part of one consortia, other ones are part of 2, 3. So that part you'll put in. And then I think, yeah, so and then anything you own outside of a consortia. So if you bought something outright that is not part of your consortia, you would include in your we own this section. So there's 3 questions. What do we own singularly? What do we own as part of consortia? And then what does the state make available through IDEA?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then someone put Overdrive Advantage copies count as owned by your library alone, correct? I have to admit that I am not the master on Overdrive, so Tammy may be able to answer that. I know she's been doing a lot more, but if not, I will get back to you on that one.
So, Jamie, I think that must have been sent to you privately. So can you read the question again?
Yeah, Overdrive Advantage copies count as owned by your library alone. Is that correct?
That would be correct. The change would be if you choose to move those Advantage titles to the entire consortium. At that point, then the count would be different. Did that make sense?
Oh.
Will you be able to get stats from Sora in our schools? So, the Sora, okay, let me see if I'm getting the question you're asking, Kathy. Are you asking if students are checking out your consortia-owned Overdrive titles? Will you be able to count those? Is that your question?
Yes, because our school's doing Sora through our Overdrive.
Right. those, SOAR is the way that they're accessing those, and our understanding is that you will be able to see those in your Overdrive counts.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so just to add, because I'm not as familiar with all the different consortia you have and where you're getting your ebooks and how they count them for you, you can ask me questions individually and I can go look at websites. Or if you find that you absolutely can't get the data, for all data elements when you're entering, the best option is to give the real numbers if you have them. If you have a way to reasonably estimate and get a really good number and not just throw something out of nowhere, you can estimate if you don't have the exact number. But if you really don't know, if the data is not available, you can always enter -1, which is the symbol for data not available or not collected. So if you're part of a consortia and you're dealing with them and they really cannot provide you the data, you just put in that -1, and that's our clue that you have titles, you just don't know how many. But I think most of them, because they work with libraries all across the country, usually they have some sort of way on your admin page for your account for you to see that information. Are there any other questions? I know this is kind of one of those areas that gets a little rough. Okay, hearing none, then we'll go ahead and move on. So this is the other section that is basically going to completely change. And all of the current questions are going to change because they want to look at synchronous and asynchronous programs, which I think is something that everyone is going to be happy about, especially after COVID, when there were so many things that didn't really fit the definition and you didn't get to count. So now you're going to be counting your live programs, your pre-recorded programs, and when I get to it in just a second, you'll also see we're going to have the like grab and go type activities. So basically all of section 10 is going to change. All of the current questions are going to go away, and we're going to get new questions. And I did not put the actual definitions for these ones up just because it is incredibly long, but it is in the document that I sent to you, and we can talk about it now, and I can pull it up on another screen if you guys want to see it. But the first section is looking at those synchronous programs. And the other thing that is happening is there is a push nationwide to get better data on early literacy programs. So they are breaking the children's programs down into 2 subgroups. There's going to be ages 0 through 5 and then 6 to 11, whereas right now it's just one group. So just so that you don't feel like you're not going to be able to report for this next year, what they're going to do on the federal level for fiscal year 21, if you've only been collecting a singular number for children and you can't break it down, instead of auto-totaling, so most of the things in our survey, when you enter them in and they're supposed to total up, we auto-total for you. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have the boxes for children 0 to 5, children 6 to 11, and then total kids programs. If you cannot break them down by categories, you'll just put those -1 entries in the 0 through 5 and 6 through 11, and then in the total, you can enter the total that you've been collecting for this year in that line. So this is one of the items where I would definitely say, you know, don't worry about it for this year. If you've only been collecting one number and you can't break it down, just plan to start doing that on October 1st of 2021, and you can just report that singular number for the year. But they were trying to match the age ranges for other surveys and other nationwide things and get that early literacy data, so that's why there's this new breakdown. So you're going to have the synchronous programs 0 through 5, 6 through 11. Young adult is going to be 12 through 18. Targeted at adults is 8 to 19 and older, and then you'll also have your general where it's not targeted at a single age. They're also looking at your synchronous programs that are in person on site at the library, and your synchronous programs that are off site, and your synchronous programs that are virtual. So if you're doing a virtual story time, that would count as a synchronous program that is virtual. When I get to the next slide, we're going to talk about asynchronous. And basically what's going to happen is if you do a story time and you record it, the portion where you're doing it live, you can count as one virtual live program, so synchronous virtual program. And then the recorded version that you put up on your website for people to access later, you can count as one asynchronous virtual program. So you're going to be able to, it'll kind of double count, but you're providing it in two separate formats. You're providing it live and you're providing it asynchronously. Does anyone have questions on these? Basically, these are the breakdowns. So you're going to count the total number of programs, and then you're going to count the attendance at each of these type of programs. Okay, I'll keep moving, and then if you have questions, just let me know. So this is basically the related attendance for all the programs I just talked about. And then here are the asynchronous programs. So one of the things to note here is, like I said, you can count a program twice if you're providing it in two formats, live and then recorded that people can access later. They're also making the definition of the attendance at the asynchronous programs views within 7 days. So before, we didn't really have a good way to say, you know, this is exactly how you should count the views of those recorded programs, and this is the definition they decided on. So you can't count the totals that are viewed over a whole year if it's a really popular thing that you leave up for a long time. It's just those first 7 days is the metrics that you should capture to report for the public library statistics. For me, if I was doing it, I would still capture the total stats used locally to report to my board and my community, because if you get a lot of views, you got a lot of views. There's no reason to not still keep that number, but the 7-day mark is what we're looking at here. And I've put those definitions up for you on the slide. Basically, it's anything where it's either, you know, you pre-recorded, so there was no live audience ever, it was just material that you recorded and put up, or it's something where you did it live, but you kept a recording and made it available later. And with these, we're also going to have related, like I said, the attendance, so the presentations within 7 days. Okay, and so those were the questions that got added at the federal level. But from the feedback we got from libraries about wanting to be able to pick up, you know, those grab and go things, the types where they're not really considered under the definition of a program, we came up with a few questions that we hope can gather a few more metrics for you to give a fuller picture of what your library is doing. So the first one is number of passive programs. So passive programs are something where the people don't have to actively participate all at the same time, whereas with a program, usually it's, you know, we're all together, we're all doing story time right now. So passive programs, you know, if you have a make and take project, grab and go bags, some people set up the story walks where it's available for a whole month and people can kind of just walk through. Those are all passive programs because the librarian isn't there actively running the program at that time. People are just kind of going through on their own. So you'll be able to count all of those programs that you put together. So something like a story walk that you do over a month, that would be one passive program, but you'll also be able to count the participants in those passive programs. So over a month, you may get 300 participants in that one program. And so we've put some definitions here that hopefully give you an idea of where to go with those. We're also looking at adding the number of community outreach events that the library participates in. So these are not programs, these are not, so they're not on-site, they're not off-site programs. So an off-site program might be you doing story time at a daycare. This is where you're going and maybe you're at the Rotary Club or something else where the library has a presence, but you're not providing programming. So it's just something where you're going out and the library still has a reach or an influence. You're doing something. We want you to be able to report on those to show what you're doing in the community. Does anyone have any questions on these?
This is Melanie again. It was going to take me too long to type it in. Will all of these definitions be like as a drop down, or on the actual report, or should we kind of be taking copies of them to reference them?
Yeah. So in the report, if you've ever gone through, at the end of each question, there's a little circle that has a question mark in it. If you click on that circle, it pops up the definition. And there is also a link, I think it's in the upper right-hand corner, that says survey instructions. If you click on that, each question is listed with its definition below. So you should have those two places where you can go to get the definitions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and someone asked, how do you know how many people saw the story walk? So this is one of those where it's kind of, they're a little harder to do, especially if it's outside the library. If it's something inside the library, like I know my sister is a children's librarian and she did a treasure hunt in the library where people could just walk in and do it over a few weeks. Then they kind of just had the librarian do a little check as they saw people do it. So if it's something you can keep an eye on, again, we try to get real numbers as much as possible. If you need to estimate, if you're doing a practice such as an average day or an average week over the course of the program, so you don't want to pick something where you know it's like a holiday week and you're super busy, you want to pick that average week or the average day and then multiply by the number of days or weeks. So you could do it that way. So maybe one day someone just kind of checks how many people they kind of see doing it, and then you multiply out. Or if you can get that real number, task someone in the library that day, hey, if you see them go to, our poetry wall and do something, that's our passive program, make a little check. And if it's something where, the whole family participates, so, the parent goes through and reads the stuff to the child, you can count 2 participants, just like you would at a regular story time where you count the child and the parent who is there. And someone said, so ours are outside in several locations, no way we could tell the use. So yeah, that's going to happen depending on how you do it. And again, you have that -1 number that you can enter, or you can try to estimate. So we prefer the real number if you can get it. If you can't, we prefer the estimate. If you provide it, but you absolutely cannot give a number because there's just no way to know, and any estimate would be completely off, it'd be better to put the -1. And then you could always put a note in. So each question allows you to give those notes. If I did 3 passive programs and my attendance was 200 for those, and then I have this other passive program where I have absolutely no idea what the attendance was, you can put that in the note because then the notes are part of the data set. So we had 3 programs that totaled 200 in attendance, and then this other one where we think we maybe had 300 people, but we have no way to estimate. And then whoever looks at your data later on would be able to see the -1 and then the numbers you did provide. So you can make use of those notes to provide that extra information for any of the questions, if that helps. Let's see, would my first books, reading at the local school, count as an outreach in the community? So I think that my first book, and I would have to check with Stacy because I may be wrong, but if you're reading at the local school, I would think that that would be an off-site program because you're sort of doing like a story time at the school. And Tammy may know more about my first books than I do, so she may be able to answer better. But I think for the outreach in the community, we were thinking more like when I worked at a prison library in Illinois, I went to a quarterly meeting at the state library where it was different state agencies, and we were just meeting to talk about state issues and how our library services could work together. So I could count all of those quarterly meetings that I went to as something that was not a program I did, but it was an outreach effort to work with other groups in my community, if that helps define and clarify. Tammy, do you want to add anything for that one?
No, Jamie, I think it was a good question, and I think you're, do you think it's fair to, let me just back up. My First Books tends to happen 8 times in a year, so monthly at the same location. So I think, even the way you described it, it fits better in the, not the outreach category, that other one that you mentioned. Did you say an offsite program?
Programs offsite. So synchronous programs, because your library staff is there providing the program in real time, but it's offsite, not at the library.
Yeah. So I think that was it helped me frame it a little different. Hopefully that helped you, Terry, as well.
Okay, so no one else has questions. I'll go ahead and move on. All right, so section 11 is the internet terminals and users. Our broadband consultant and Dylan also said that they could really use the number of wireless sessions at the branch level, because that gives them more information on what areas need more service and more support than just getting the total at the main entity level. So what's going to happen is, this used to be a fill-in box at the main level. Instead, it's going to auto total up from the branch level. So if you have 5 branches, you'll need to be able to get this information for each branch. Most of you should be able, through your Wi-Fi service, to be able to get this. If you have questions about how to get it, you can talk to Dylan or William and they can help you, but it should be available. And this is one where people always have trouble counting Wi-Fi sessions. If you cannot get the data, this is a good place to put that -1. And then section 12, like I said, this is going to get a new question where for each outlet that you enter, that you're going to have to enter the Wi-Fi sessions at that level. And then there's going to be a question, is the reporting method for the wireless session an annual count or an estimate? So if you're estimating, you'll just, basically it's a drop box where you pick one or the other. And then there also, for the reporting method for number of uses of internet computers, there's also going to be the drop down for, is it an annual count or an estimate, so that it makes it a little more clear when people are trying to compare numbers, whether this was the actual count or the estimate, because especially with Wi-Fi sessions, it can be really hard to estimate, especially if your service extends outside the library and runs during the hours that staff aren't there, and there's no one to know that you had 10 people sitting in your parking lot overnight trying to do their homework. So if you're estimating, that just gives a little more clarity on what the number means compared to another library's number. So the number of outlets, internet computers, this one, it's changed at the federal level, and they're just trying to clarify that it doesn't just have to be a desktop computer. So now that libraries have circulating laptops and tablets and all of these things that connect through Wi-Fi to the internet for patrons to use, they're just making sure that you realize that you can count all of those things. So you don't just have to count the desktop computers that were in your computer area. If you have a tablet that can be checked out to use in the library, you can also count that tablet. So it's just an updated definition for the same question. The other thing that is going to happen, the internet speed used to be a drop-down box with different options. And with discussion we had at ICFL, it was mentioned that it would be much more useful to our staff to know your actual internet speed. So not have it be in a certain range, actually have you just enter in an open entry box so that they can use that, again, to see maybe where they can focus on providing more services or resources. And then we're going to be removing 12.14, which was the internet connectivity. I believe it asked, is this a fiber connection? Is it, that they said we don't really use or need. And then we're also going to be taking out the whole section that was the daily hours and schedule. we talked about it internally, and we don't really use it for anything. I think it was used in the past just to make sure that libraries were open enough hours to qualify for grants. But especially this year with so many changes where libraries were closed and opened and then varying their schedule, those schedules don't really match what you're actually doing. So we didn't think that there was very much purpose in having you fill it out from year to year.
Hey, Jamie.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is April from the Robert City Library. Hey, on the internet speed, will there be a link that will help us test our internet speed at that time? Or anything like that?
I believe that there is, so there's that, I can't remember the exact website, but there's like the speedtest.com or something like that. I can ask Dylan what it's called, but there's a website where if you just go to it, it will check your speed up and your speed down and give it to you. And so like, you know, whenever my house internet is going out and my husband needs to talk to the provider, he checks our speed to see if we're actually getting what we're paying for. So you should be able to pull that data when you need it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and someone put it in the chat.
Jamie,
Yeah.
Jamie, yeah, I think maybe a recommendation might be in the, you know, to include the link, whether it's in the definition or something. So I think that's something we could probably do. Wouldn't that work? That we could just add that?
Yep. Yeah, and I forgot to say at the beginning, I'm sorry that, so some of these don't have numbers yet for where they're, I gave you the section, but I didn't give you like this item is going to be 9.3. And that's because we just got our RFQ settled. So now I have to go work with the vendor to create the new survey. So we're going to have to remove some stuff, put some stuff in, so some numbering may change. But yes, with all of those, when we create the survey, we can change definitions, add resources in that you can use. And someone did put it in the chat, so it's speedtest.net. So we can put that into the instructions in the survey so that you can pull that if you need to. Okay.
Jamie, your question on 1216 with the daily hours and schedules, does that still reflect, do you still want to know, like I go in each day and on a spreadsheet, I say that we were open for 6 hours and then at the very end of the year, it totals it up. Do I need to do that again or after?
So
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the part that we're still keeping, because they're federal questions and we have to do them, we're still keeping the annual hours open per year, the weeks open per year, the weeks with limited occupancy because of COVID, and the weeks closed because of COVID. So you'll still have those questions. So for yourself, you'll still need to keep track of your annual hours, but what you won't be doing is the part where it's very long. We have two sections. We have your winter hours and then your summer hours section. And then for every single day, there's the part for you to put, we were open 9 to 5. And then there's a section where you put that equals 8 hours. We're going to get rid of all of that. When we have our grant openings, we always have you check a little box that says, yes, I meet the eligibility requirements for this grant. And part of those eligibility requirements are that you're open, you know, a minimum number of hours per week. So I think that in the past, this was used just for them to have a way to verify that. But right now, we're not using it for anything, so there's no reason for you guys to have to fill it out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, nothing else, then we'll go ahead and move to the next one. So in this section for trustees, we're going to add a box for you to enter an email for each trustee. And I know in the past when I dealt with this, trustees were worried about this becoming public information and getting out, and that's not going to be the case at all. This is basically for us at ICFL to have a way to reach your trustees, to let them know about things like trustee connections and different information that is coming out from us to them. So it gets filled out on the survey, but like whenever I create the data set that goes up on our website, I cut out the trustee section entirely and it's only the library data that goes up. So their email, if they're worried about it, is not going to be publicly pasted on our website. It's going to be like yesterday, Tammy asked me, hey, do you have a list of the trustee emails? And that's all it's going to be used for. So you can reassure them that we're asking for it. We just want a way to contact them because we do provide programming and resources that are helpful to them. And we want to be able to reach them without having to do mass mailings.
So for our board of trustees that don't have email, and I have 2 of them, is it a -1?
Right. So I don't think that we're going to mark this. There's not going to be an edit check where if you don't fill it in, it's going to flag. So you should be able to leave it blank, but you can just write NA or no email just so that we know that you're not just leaving it blank. You can also, a lot of times trustees get an email through the library. So if you're able to set up an extra email account for them that they'll actually check, because we're going to use this as a way to contact them. So if they don't have email and they don't check email, just put NA and we'll just have to do the old fashioned way if we need to reach them.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, we are almost at the end here. So for next year, there are going to be a few of the COVID yes/no questions that you had to do this past survey that are going to go away, and they're going to go away mostly because they're asking about what you were doing before the pandemic. So they're not really necessary anymore because you already answered them once. So we don't need them again. But the other yes/no questions are still going to be there to answer the current year about things you did for the ongoing portion of the pandemic. So all of these ones listed here, 14.3, 4, 8, 9, and 10 are all going to be removed. And that is basically a very quick rundown of all of the changes. Does anyone have any specific questions for anything I can answer now? Okay, hearing none, I am always available. Oh, Tammy just put a note in the chat box letting you guys know of an upcoming trustee training. So there's a link there if you're interested in that. But
Yeah, please sign up your trustees, and you are also welcome. It'll be on strategic planning.
So as you look through this material, you can always ask me questions. When the survey goes live, like I said, all these things will be on our next survey, but if you feel like you can't answer them, don't worry about it. Just put -1, so especially for the ones that are completely new, like the asynchronous programs, offsite, all of those things that you may not have been collecting. Don't worry about it. You know, just start collecting it for October 1st. And just send me questions as you have them, and we'll go from there. We'll probably do another training when the survey opens, just to walk through in case anyone wants to go through the new survey. But if no one has any other questions, I will stop the recording there.